Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Views on View. It's been a couple weeks. My name is Steve Edwards. I am the host with the face for radio and the voice for being a mime, but I'm still your host. Flying with me today on my panel, I have Mr. David Neal. How you doing, David?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me back on the show.
Always good to have you. Always good to have you. For those of you who might not have heard, David is our resident artist who can draw things that I can only dream about. But he's got his book of dad jokes and does a lot of artist stuff with his presentations. If you want to listen to last week's episode, we talked about that, and you can get the skinny there. Our guest today, coming to us from Cairo, Egypt, is Mr. Abdelrahman Awad. How you doing, Abdelrahman? Do you go Abdel or Abdelrahman?
I'll go Abdelrahman, but yeah, I'm all good.
Abdelrahman.
Yeah.
There we go.
I'm good, Steve. Thank you for having me.
It is our pleasure. Today we are here to talk about VeeValidate, which is something, if you're in the Vue world, you've probably heard of in terms of form validation, which is something that's so easy, a piece of cake in HTML, right? Anyway, before we get into VeeValidate, why don't you just tell us about yourself, why you're famous, what you do, and so on and so forth.
Sure. I'm not sure if I'm famous, but I am from Cairo, Egypt. I started off as a backend engineer. I did a lot of PHP, Laravel. Then I moved on to Node.js, which naturally I landed in the front end world because of that. Then I started trying out new frameworks to learn Angular, some React, but I really liked Vue, and that was Vue 0.12, right before it was first release. And
Oh,
I
wow.
fell, yeah, I fell in love with it. So I started using it in my projects, and then eventually 1.0 came out. I started creating VeeValidate around that time because, yeah, I needed something like that. It was really early in the ecosystem then, but maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here. So, and I stayed with front end ever since, and it's been 4 years as a front end engineer now.
Right. Do you want to give a shameless plug about where you work and where you use Vue on your day-to-day?
Of course, I work in Rasayel. It's a company where it allows you. It's a SaaS app that allows companies to communicate with their customers using WhatsApp. So it's an inbox slash campaigns manager slash automations and bots, and it's all built with Vue.js.
Oh, with Vue.js. Alrighty. Now, what's interesting, a couple things we'll touch on your history. Uh, Interesting that you started PHP and Laravel because that's my day-to-day. Is I work on a very large Vue app with Laravel, and then I have another project that I do and maintain that uses Laravel with Vue and Inertia.js. If you're familiar with Inertia.js, which is completely awesome. And so, yeah, I came from the similar world. Now, what's interesting is that most anybody that I've talked to, when they talk about when they came into the Vue ecosystem and started using it, usually it's around at least 2.0. You're the first person I've ever talked to that's using it like pre 1.0 or even pre
Yeah,
2.0. So that's quite
you
interesting.
can blame Jeffrey Way for that. Like he did a course on 0.12,
Did he
and I
really?
started
Okay.
and I started then. He updated it, and I relearned it again, and here we are.
Yeah, I had about almost exactly a year ago, I was able to get on Taylor Otwell. And part of the discussion was about how, at least for me, I started seeing when I would Google issues, as all developers do, what's this bug or how do I do this or that? I was getting a lot of Laracast forums links. And I was like, okay, why am I seeing all this Vue stuff in Laravel? And so, we've talked about that whole history of with Taylor about how his famous tweet about React is a mess, I'm going to try Vue, or React is something, I don't remember what it is, and how that got him into the Vue world and how tightly integrated Laravel is with Vue, which is, to me, is awesome. And I know Jeffrey, when Inertia first came out, he did a course on Inertia, and then he ended up converting his whole site to Inertia and then doing more course on Inertia. So that's sort of been fascinating to watch. Did you do any? You ever use any other PHP frameworks or CMSs? Like WordPress is a real common one for PHP, or is Laravel your real starting point into PHP?
I'm not sure if it's a framework. I used something, if I remember correctly, called Smarty. I'm not sure if it's a framework or it's just a templating engine or is PHP. I think it's Smarty PHP or something. Then I
Oh,
jumped
yeah, it's a
immediately to
template engine.
Laravel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then I jumped immediately to Laravel 5.0 and it was beta then, but I started learning on Laracast as well. So lots
Right.
of shout outs.
Yeah, Smarty has a true, I would say, late 1990s, early 2000s vibe on their website for sure. I recognize it. Looks like a 960 grid layout or something like that, but
Yeah, it's really old.
it's really old.
So how
So,
did you make that jump from Laravel to Node.js? What was the kind of the motivation for that?
Uh, we mostly wanted to try a few things. We were experimenting with a lot of technologies in my company then called Bayonet. We wanted to try multiple different things like WebSockets, so real time and stuff like that. And Node.js seemed like the better tool to use then for that kind of applications. Also, we wanted to try NoSQL, so MongoDB went really well hand
Right.
in hand with Node.js. So it's just an experiment, and we tested a few things, and we really liked the results with Node.js. Although we did a lot of, we used Express. There wasn't really a framework like Laravel that helps you stitch things together like Laravel does. So it was really hard to ship applications with it, but it was mostly experiments. But I liked JavaScript because of that, because of Node, because of how it
Hmm.
seemed to work. And yeah,
Are you still using Express, or are you using some other back end system today?
I don't write a lot of backend Node.js applications at the moment, but when I do, I use Nitro, which is a newish kind of framework. It's really nice. I used Nest.js before it, but it's mostly Express or Nitro because I don't write a lot of backend, not like a production ready stuff.
Okay.
yeah, I know Nuxt has something called Nitro in it. Is that, I'm guessing that's
Yes.
different?
It's the same one. It's the same framework that's powering Next. So Next is built on Nitro, and Nitro you can use on its own. So
Oh, it's a standalone tool. Okay, I see. So is it similar to Express in terms of that API
it's way
layer?
better. It's way better because it does some kind of how Next pages thing work, where
Mhm.
you generate routes based on the pages directory. Nitro does the same for your API endpoints. So you just create a
Oh.
file, and that's your endpoint.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, I remember when uh, how do I say, when Node was sort of becoming a thing, or at least when I was becoming aware of it, or in Mongo in particular. I was in the Drupal world at the time, and there was a couple of people that were really pushing to allow Drupal to use a Mongo type database. Um, and so I started digging in that, and Node itself, no, excuse me, Mongo University had a course on Mongo for Node developers. And so I went through and learned, a little bit of Node and how to query and a lot of the basics and stuff. But never really went down the Node path too much. Now my day to day, my app GovTribe we have a huge Mongo database, huge, just because the amount of data that we take in that we make available to our users, that we host on Atlas. So it's been interesting there, sort of combine these different worlds, in that from Laravel up until a few months ago, a guy named Jen Segers maintained the MongoDB integration for Laravel to Mongo, is Jen Segers MongoDB. And then, so it was really getting a lot of use. Well, then he wasn't keeping up with it. Things weren't getting committed and changed. And so the Laravel community took over that library. And so now it's MongoDB Laravel instead of the Jen Segers. And then they've made some changes. And I've actually been wrestling with some Laravel 10 upgrades in Mongo for the past couple of weeks. So yeah, that's interesting. Mongo certainly has its, and that's a whole different topic that we've talked about elsewhere places. Mongo has its use cases. In some cases, it's good. In other cases, it's not so good. If you use it when you have more dynamic database structure needs, then it's definitely better than SQL. But anyway, cool. So zero point 0.2. So let's talk about VeeValidate then. It sounds like the way you were describing it, that it was sort of a scratch your own itch, right? You've got a need, you're tired of messing around with HTML forms and form validation and so on and so forth. So you decide to write this and put it out there. So tell me how that all started.
Okay, so and at the beginning with the Vue community, it wasn't really big then, so it lacked a lot of what you would expect from uh, an ecosystem, right? Uh,
Hmm.
it lacked localization, it lacked forms, it lacked a bunch of things, but everybody was like trying to build this kind of com- community libraries or ecosystem libraries. So there was already a form validation library. I think it was called VU Validator,
Yeah,
and
I've seen that.
I have used it and I liked it at the beginning, but I didn't like the way to, that allowed developers to extend the validators, and the way that it just didn't feel, it felt really unwieldy. So I decided to, okay, I can build my own thing using my own projects. I had no plans to publish it or share it with anybody. It's a me thing. So start with a simple JS file that I put in my Laravel applications, and I decided to give it like some syntax similar to Laravel rules, right? When you have this required pipe min colon 8 kind of string expressions for rules. So I decided to give it the same syntax. Seems easier to write, easier to extend, easier to parse, and so on. So I built that. It worked well for my small projects. It worked well for my company projects at the time. And then I decided to give it a go and publish it, since I just to make it easier for me to install it in other projects. So I just give it a random name. I didn't really think about it. It used to be the API used to use a directive, a Vue.js directive. So directives start with the V dash the directive name. So it's VeeValidate, and
All
that's
right.
how we spell it. So that's how it got the name. I didn't really think about it. So I published it and start sharing it in the Laracast's community forums and Laravel related communities, because that's my demographic kind of like I am a Laravel developer who wants to have this easy way to have real time form validation in my projects. So I just shared it with the people who I think would appreciate it the most, and that a lot of people liked it. Started Downloads started going up. A lot of people started on GitHub, so it went really well. And then I guess the moment where it just shot up with popularity is when Taylor Otwell started on GitHub. So then it just got better from here in terms of popularity. People started downloading it. People started using it more. I started getting a lot of issues, and yeah, that's how it started.
Awesome. So now with any validation, this is strictly front end validation, right? And if you have a back end, you're also going to want to do validation on your back end because, you know, just
You
I
can't
always do it
trust the
just to
front
make
end.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't always trust it. But this gives you um, at least an easy way to plug into your forms and get some validation. Now, does it almost also do? I'm sorry, I haven't really looked through all the docs yet, but is it? Can you also do things like, say, auto formatting of a field? So let's say you have a phone number field and you always want it to be in a certain format based on your locality, or an email address, or something like that. Does it provide those capabilities as well?
So Viva has changed a lot since. So it used to be a directive, like I said. Then it became a component, a headless component. Then it became right now the composition API with Vue 3. So it changed a lot, and the features it offered changed with that. So back then it was just validation with the directive. with the
Mhm.
components, it was still about validation, but it gave you some UX um, improvements. Like you could bind some classes, you could bind some area attributes, you could um, track some values. That's about it. But with version 4, which is the current one for Vue 3 Composition API, it does a lot of things. It does value tracking, form handling, submissions, but it doesn't do the formatting or masking because you can really easily do it using another library like Vue. There's a lot of libraries. One of them is Vue currency input. You can import it, use their composition API, and compose the two together. So VeeValidate composition API can be composed with the Vue currency input, and you get both a currency input that is validatable, submittable, and so on.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking at your docs here. Just curiosity, what are you using for your docs? Generate your docs? You use like Beautify or something like that? Or not Beautify, but what's the framework, David?
Uh, Astro,
Oh, you're using Astro. Oh, okay, cool.
yeah,
Yeah, I like Astro. Astro, I use that. I've used that for a static site or two, and it's pretty cool with what it can do.
yeah, it's really cool.
What's the
I'm
docs
curious.
framework built on Vue? I can't. I'm brain farting on it now, and I can't think what it was that Evan had released.
Uh,
Mm.
Brain farting here. That you could just plug in. Anyway,
The one for the docs,
yeah.
Vite Press, I think.
There you go. Vue Press. Yeah. Okay, that's what I was thinking it was. But okay. Yeah. So how do you like Astro? Just side note, because I've had Fred Schott on here, and then another episode. Well, so we've talked about Astro quite extensively.
I think for my use case, which is just static content, it just works amazingly.
Hmm.
It's really simple to use. This island architecture make it really easy to incorporate your favorite framework. So it's Vue.js for me, of course, but it can be confusing at first, can be weird at first.
Right.
I would say it's a little bit harder than Next at the beginning, but I really like their I think I liked having more control over my content, how it's generated, how it's being typed. So yeah, I really like that. But Max content is just as great right now.
Right.
So I could switch at any moment.
Really. So are you using just like straight Tailwind components, or are you using Vue components within? Not Tailwind. I'm
Just
sorry,
Tailwind.
Astro components.
Yeah, I'm using a bunch of Astro components, but it's mostly for the static stuff like the site header, site footer, just
Mhm.
simple components. Well, I guess the article cards are, well, no, with VeeValidate. No, that's my blog. Sorry, with VeeValidate, it's documentation. I don't use a lot of Astro components, like none almost. It's all Vue components.
I'm curious, as your open source project has evolved over time with the different versions that you've and iterations that you've gone through. What's been some of the challenges and um, you know uh, most difficult parts of maintaining this project?
Um, there is a lot of learnings here, but I guess I'll start from what I learned first, and over then I go to what I learned last. So what I learned first is you can't satisfy everybody. You know, like at the beginning,
Yeah.
I was really excited. Like my project got some attention, it got some spotlight. So I need to make as many people as happy as possible. You know, so when everybody wanted a feature, it was like it would be cool if you can do this, and I was like, you got it, and just implement it the next day. And I kept doing that for a very long time, and I ended up with a really messy API because when I started writing document, like I didn't have documentation at first, it was just a README. So I decided, yeah, it should have a documentation. And when I started writing documentation, I started to see how messy the API was. Like you could do this thing in 5 different ways, and none of them
Hmm.
is kind of perfect. You know, like it's really hard to write documentations, especially if it's really easy if you are the one who's writing the library, but it's at the same time it's hard if you are trying to explain it to somebody else because okay, what in what way I want them to write this API or this feature that they should be implementing. So that's the first thing. Don't do everything. You shouldn't even try to do everything. Like should have a clear direction of what the library should be and what to say no to and what to consider, right? So I learned that after version 2, so I started doing that with version 3. And with version 4, I'm even more like aggressive with it in terms of people asking for something and tell them no, we aren't doing that, and just rejecting it. Um, for a lot of things, we can just spark it like it's an enhancement, so it needs some thinking. Like I can't just say, okay, let's implement the first thing that comes to my mind. But no, that shouldn't work like that. So that's, I guess, my first lesson. Second is people really hate breaking changes. So
Mm,
Shocking.
yeah.
yeah, like they absolutely hate it with a passion. Like VeeValidate changed a lot, like a lot across releases. So V2 to V3, that's the directive gone. That's the main way of using the library. It's completely changed. With V3 to V4, it's also completely changed because we now encourage the composition API more, and the API is widely different. And the reasons are, it's not like I wanted to do that. Sometimes it's outside of my control. For example, during the transition from Vue 1 to Vue 2, the directives are no longer instance based. So that means I couldn't store data on a directive instance. So that means I can't use a directive to maintain a field state. So that meant the API had to change, and we ended up with a much better pattern with headless components. But then came the composition API, which is similar to React hooks, which is a better pattern for headless or provider patterns or that kind of functionality. So, and also some internal change, it made the old API impossible to implement. So that's another breaking change. But people don't understand that or try try to acknowledge that all they care about is where is the migration guide or why is this not working the way it was before. And I made a lot of enemies. Like I didn't think you can make enemies
Oh,
from
wow.
open source, but
Seriously.
yeah, I got a lot of like angry messages. So that's interesting. But I kind of understand it's a huge change, but at the same time, it's uh it's hard when you're making a library or an API, maintaining an API, and then you recognize something that you shaped. Okay, I made a mistake with this. I want to change it now. So not a lot of people can rely on it, you know. And but
Mhm,
then if
yeah.
you kind of deprecate it, it's a breaking change. So yeah, it's a tricky balance. Respecting semantic versioning has been really uh, important for this project, but I don't follow it to the letter. Like sometimes I would introduce a breaking change just because it's causing too much DX issues. A lot of people are complaining about it. Um, so I would just introduce a breaking change, put it in a change log, and it's worked well for this project so far. But it's not something I would recommend for every other project. So yeah, I think these are my key learnings.
What have you learned about involving other people in the open source? And, do you have like uh, more folks that you can rely on to help implement features or do reviews or, what are, have you been able to share some of the load and responsibility as the project is matured?
Yeah, that's I guess I forgot about saying that as a learning. Like it's hard to foster a community around the library. Building a core team is extremely hard. So far, I'm the only guy that's been
Mm,
constantly on the project. During times, I had some people be around for a month or two before jumping off. I'm not sure what I should be doing. Like it's a hard thing. Like people are interested in the project, they keep contributing to it, and a lot of them once they got the features they wanted in, they simply didn't
right.
continue contributing. I tried to create an organization, invited a few people, but they that were active in the library, but they said they don't want they don't want to be tasked with maintaining the library. They want to be
Yeah.
doing it whenever they can, and they want this freedom of sorts.
Yeah. They don't
So
want the responsibility.
exactly, yeah. So I failed completely in that regard in fostering a community around it, and yeah, I'm the only guy working on it actively at the moment. But I do appreciate every single contribution that comes in.
Yeah, I was looking at the GitHub repo, and it looks like a lot of people have contributed um, to, like, I guess, pull requests or bug fixes or whatever, or feature ideas. So that's great to see. I wonder, just curious, how have you maintained like energy and motivation to continue working on the project if it's pretty much just you doing it?
Um, I think this is gonna sound cheesy, but it's because I like it. Like I like writing code. So after work, I would just open up VeeValidate and say, okay, we need to fix this and this. Sometimes I don't have any energy at all during the week, so I would maybe contribute on the weekends only. Sometimes I don't have any energy for an entire month, and sometimes I have like I here in Egypt you serve in the military for all males serve in the military. So I maintained VValidate during my service in the military, which was really hard because don't have internet. So I had to visualize
Oh,
what I
wow.
wanted to do, on the when I get a vacation for about 4 days, then I come type it down, pull request it, go back to the military, and so on. It was
Wow.
really it's because I like it. I think it's because I like it.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting listening to you is what you really stated is common knowledge for people who maintain open source libraries. Um, you can't make everybody happy. You got to have a plan. You got to stick to it. It's hard getting contributors. People um, make assumptions and sort of have what's the word I'm looking for? They sort of assume that you owe them something as users of your library as compared to the other way around, especially those that that don't contribute to it. So yeah, it's nothing too surprising there. And there, as you said, there are users that um, will contribute, but only when they really need it. I can, just thinking of my own development history, at times I've been using a project or a library or something, and so I'll contribute to it. And then once, as my day to day, I'm off that, or even on a side project, not using it, then I really don't have any interest of going back and contributing. But it sounds like you've done a pretty good job in terms of a balance. I could see it for me. If I'm working all day on Vue and then I want to go spend my evening hours doing some more Vue, that can lead to some pretty bad burnout. So, striking a good balance, work-life balance is definitely an important thing. It sounds, if you take off a week here or a month there or something like that and come back to it, then hey, great. You can always say, if people are screaming, "Hey, what about this and what about that?" You can say, "Hey, patch is welcome." It's always the classic open
Yeah,
source phrase. If you want to contribute something, I am more than happy to review it and check it out, but I need some help from you. So yeah, that's definitely uh, just common experience across the board that I've heard from open source over the years, over the last 20 years that I've been involved in
yeah.
open source.
What's been something that you feel like is one of the most interesting uses of your library that you maybe came across or heard about, or discovered, that someone was using your code to do something that you wouldn't have imagined?
Yeah, that's an amazing question because I have an exactly one case that lives rent free in my head because of how mind blowing it was for me. So when people come to me and say where they are building multi-step forums, they are building like this state management form thingy. Yeah, this is what I designed the library for. Like
Hmm.
you should be able to do these things. It's impressive and all, but it is possible. Like I can see it happening. But one guy decided to use it on the backend, decided to use it on Node.js, and it works apparently. I never tried it. I never thought it like to even imagine trying it, but apparently it does. It works well for them. So that blew my mind.
So
That's
they're doing
cool.
form validation
They
in
are using
Node.js on the back end.
yes, they are using vValidate to validate the requests that are coming from the uh, through to their endpoints. Which yeah, it's possible, but I never imagined it.
Hmm.
Interesting. So they're just using the API then, obviously.
Yes, they are
Nothing
just
that's
grabbing the
UI
validate
rendering.
function,
Right.
validate function, the rule system, and that's what they need. And yeah, it's definitely possible, but I never considered doing that.
Well, I guess
Yeah.
it makes sense. I mean, isn't that the whole purpose of isomorphic JavaScript? JavaScript, one language to rule them all, and in the
Yeah,
darkness
of
bind
course.
them, to borrow a quote from a famous book. Um, so that's awesome. It's yeah, one of the things I've discovered uh, over the years when I've put out, a project or an application, one of the benefits of doing, getting testing outside of yourself is it's amazing the use cases that people will find that you never would have considered in your head in your limited scope, right, of use. And but people, oh, great, I can use it here. This is great.
Yeah, sometimes people send me emails about something they are building, and I would jump on a call with them to see what if it's like too interesting. I would just tell them, okay, let's schedule a call. Let me see what you are building with it. And I learned a lot from people, watching people use the library and build with it, and it definitely influenced my decisions moving forward. Like, okay, this API doesn't feel needs some adjustments because they used it pretty horribly because it forced them to be used pretty horribly. So yeah,
Is there a project or story of someone using your component to that you're like really proud to be associated with that you feel good about having contributed to some project?
like famous apps or projects. There is a
Yeah.
lot. So there is this app called VUE Telescope. It's built by the Nux team, and you basically can search if any app in the wild is using a certain Vue library. And when I looked through it using VeeValidate, I saw all kinds of crazy. Like I wouldn't have imagined these companies using it. Can I say some of them, or I'm not sure if
I don't know.
Well, if they're
I
available in View Telescope, they're certainly public then.
yes, so Blizzard apparently is using it in their account pages, and I verified
Nice.
that. I reached out to them, they didn't reply. So there is also I think Hyundai India or something. So a bunch of there is a lot of big projects using VValidate there. So using View Telescope. Can't remember there is a lot of big names there, but don't remember a lot of them. Just that Blizzard because I like their games. So
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool.
So you had mentioned there was one technical thing I wanted to ask you about just in terms of composition API. So one of the things you had mentioned was you had to go away from directives because you couldn't save state, I believe, or something like that within it. So now you can do that with the composition API, correct? Use a composable because you can store
yes,
state within a composable.
yes. So the way it evolved is since you no longer had state with directives, then the next best thing is components. That's version 3 with vValidate version 3. But then we got but that was just a hack around not being able to have reactive data that's de-associated from components. But that's possible now with the composition API. So it kind of also evolved to using that composition API instead of components to drive this functionality. It makes it much easier to integrate into your components than say a headless component. And it's true of the same thing in the React world. Like certain hooks or certain functionalities are easier to build using hooks or custom hooks than with headless components because of how the whole slots thing work. If you are using a headless view component or even a headful view component, and you have like slot props and you want to use, you couldn't move these slot props to the script tag, so you had no control over them. You had to make some nasty hacks to make it work. But that's like the slot props wasn't really meant for mutating stuff. It's mostly meant for reading stuff. So with the composition API, that's all I think solved. So you can compose this validation logic, this value tracking logic, submission logic into your component, and it should just work. So that's why it changed a lot along with Vue.js available API.
So, were there any other, so with Vue 3, did you have to did was it like a full rewrite of the library? I know like Vuetify has done that where they did a full rewrite to incorporate a lot of the Vue 3 changes, or was it just a few minor changes, or how much did that impact your library?
Initially, I thought I was fine just changing a few bits there and just keep the headless component API because there is no need to break everything for everyone, right? But then I think Vue Alpha release came out and they just like changed the one thing I was relying on. So I have to explain how Vue 3 used to work. So it worked by checking the VDOM tree. So it checked the slot and then it starts searching for the vmodel directive. And once it finds it, then that's the node that's the input node. That's what you want to validate. So it worked like that by searching the DOM tree. With Vue 3, it was working until they decided to drop directive names from the VDOM nodes. So I could no longer find the vmodel directive, which just that it's impossible now to have the same API. So I had to go back uh, to the board and replan everything, see what I can do, what I can do. Then I experimented with the composition API, and it worked great. And that was the direction it needed to go. I thought about starting another library since that's a huge change. Like, but there is no point in starting another library because I would get another questions like why is this not migrated to Vue 3? So it's same thing. So forcing everybody to migrate is better than forcing them to move to another library. It's easier at least.
So, okay, so I'm still trying to get my head around this. I haven't got quite into the internals as you did. So you were what did the composition API do that allowed you to get around that problem? You said it would just start using the composition API.
Yes. So in that's how I like to explain it. So before VValidate was trying to look for the V model, right? If it can't find the V model, then it can become the V model. So that's what the composition API kind of does for VValidate. It allows it to provide this reactive reference or refs, and
Mhm.
then that you can use that as your model instead of creating your own model. And through that, if you change that, then VValidate knows you change the value, and then since it owns that state kinda, then it can definitely do validation, do submission, do all kinds of stuff.
So you talked about how you're using headless components. Is that your current implementation?
No, that's the version 3 implementation. Version
That was
4
the old
has
one.
some headless, yeah. Version 4 still have some headless components just to maintain some form of backward compatibility, but the main way to use vValidate version 4 is the composition API.
Okay. So just for the curious who might not know that, what do you mean by a headless component? Or
It's
how
a
would you use that?
component. Yeah, it's a component that provides you some functionality and it doesn't render anything. So there are, I think, bunch of different kind of like definitions for it. Some people call it renderless components
Right.
because headless components are now like unstyled components, right? So
Right.
it's kind of
Mhm.
the definitions. Like back then, I think I thought of them as headless components because they don't have any elements to render. They just render whatever you put inside them, right? Inside their slots. So
Mhm.
regardless of what they are named, I think the most correct one is renderless components or provider components. Regardless of that, it's just so you put your stuff inside its slot, and it offers you the functionality through scooped slots. So scooped slot props are like certain data it passes to your slot, like the value you should bind to,
Mhm.
the classes that you can bind to your elements, and various functions like validate, set value, maybe set certain flags like set touch true, stuff like that.
But what you were using those for was a way then you can define your state values in there and handle your state management
Yes.
since you'd lost that, right? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. The renderless components still works because it's still the same thing, but the composition API is just much better because I think the main problem was people struggled with the scoped slots. Like, okay, I have the value in the template. How can I move it to my script? I want to do some arbitrary logic on that value. Like, I want to format it, I want to submit it to an API, I want to do various things with it. So that was really like almost impossible to do with scooped slots without some um, really like black magic Vue.js black magic like function, and that function captures the reference and weird stuff like that. But that's just a hack. Like you shouldn't rely on that. But that's true for all renderless components in Vue.js. That's there. Like it's not something specific to VValidate. It's just how this pattern works. You can't move stuff to your script. So the composition API already lives in your script, so you can easily move stuff to the template because the template uses whatever in your script. So that's why it's the better way to do it now. It's why I recommend using it over anything else in the library or the Vue.js ecosystem.
So you're on, you said version. So version 4 of VeeValidate is corresponds to Vue 3. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Um, so do you have a roadmap, or are you where are you going with that? Anything down the road, or are you just sort of adding things as the need arises?
Yeah, exactly like that. I'm just winging it in a way. I have some long-term goals like multi-step forms. I need to support it in some capacity. Value masking or formatting. I need to support some form of it. It doesn't have to do the entire thing. So these are long-term goals. I haven't decided how to yet move towards them. But what I'm focusing mostly on is um, the DX of building forms. Like how hard it is or how easy it is to get a form running and
Mhm.
hooking your stuff to it, because a lot of libraries started emerging with Vue 3. So each library needs to find this kind of like a niche audience or a niche um, way of doing forms. um, so VValidate, I think, is more geared towards those who don't use third-party components. It supports them. You can validate whatever you want with VValidate. You can support an empty span or a empty div if you really want to, but uh, or Vuetify components, Quasar components, whatever you really want. But it's not optimized for that. It's mostly optimized for people building their own components. Like you are building your own component library, whether it be like a form component library, input text, selects, and stuff like that. So it kind of abstracts a lot of the things related to building forms, like value tracking. You can't really rely on V modeling every single input you have. It's just akin to having a listener on every single input. So that can become hard while building a really large form or a dynamic form. So having a declarative way of saying, okay, this is my field, I want it to be automatically tracked just because I have it in my template. So I think that's a good like something we can discuss first before I delve further into this, which is Vue had always had two schools of thought when it comes to forms. So it had this imperative way of writing forms and declarative way of writing forms. So VValidate always lied in the camp of it being declarative. So it means the forms are declared in the template in the HTML. It doesn't live in the script as other imperative libraries would do. Like and a good example of an imperative library is VueValidate. But at the same time, VueValidate is mostly about validating anything really. So any value, arbitrary values, doesn't have to be related to inputs. But that disallows it or prevents it from providing certain abstractions. Like is the field touched? Sure. It depends on how it can know that information, or if the developer can hook up that information to VueValidate. It becomes harder then. But with a declarative library, it already lives in your template. It has access to your template. You declare the value just by typing the field, so it kind of can track itself. It kind of can track all sorts of events. I know it's hard to imagine over like just saying it like this, but it's mostly about these two schools of thought, like having template-based forms and imperative-based forms. Now, with composition API, the lines are becoming really literally, because the composition forces you to write stuff into the script and move them to the template, uh, if I may say so. But at the same time, VeeValidate main optimization or main focus is it allows you to build your own declarative forms through the composition API. So that's how the direction shifted. It's not an imperative library, as in it allows you to validate stuff. It still allows you to build forms. It still allows you to build inputs, but through the composition API, through a declarative API, if you want to make the most out of it. Sorry, I went on a long.
Oh,
Yeah,
no,
it was
not a
long.
problem. Not a problem. So now one of the things I was looking at your docs and noticing is, and you were just talking about, how your forms are generated and stuff is, uh, it looks like you can integrate with, was it Formulate? I think looks like you have some good, which is another library that helps generate your forms. I think it looks like it's your JavaScript, right? You define your forms in JavaScript, and then it renders your form for you, and then you have some pretty good uh,
Yeah, I work
integration
with
with your library, so they can validate those forms. Is that a fair statement?
yeah, but that library is discontinued. It's not longer. It's no longer maintained.
Ah,
But it used to work like that. You define a that library allowed you to define forms dynamically using a schema, and then you could
uh-huh.
have a validation provider that could be VueValidate or VeeValidate. So that's how it worked. But
Okay.
unfortunately, it's no longer being worked on.
Oh, bummer. Okay, because you still have it in your docs. And then I think, is that the only option? It looks like you can do it yourself inside with, was it Formulate? I'm looking at your build a form generator section in your docs. Was Formulate the only way to do it, or can you do it with VValidate as well, using just generate using a schema?
V- VValidate doesn't really give you like a way to make it easier for you, like how FormViolate used to do, but you
Okay, I
can
see.
pretty much come up with your own schema and build it with VValidate.
Right. Yeah, I used to when I my very first foray into working with JavaScript frameworks was with Angular 1. I think what they refer to as Angular JS now. And it was with a platform called Form.io, and that's what they did. It was uh, JavaScript defined form rendering capabilities, and there's all kind of really cool functionality that you could use behind the scene. You could really do some crazy dynamic stuff with forms and with their backend that used Mongo. It was initially just Angular, but then they extrapolated it to make it generic so that you could use anything. But the idea of form rendering based on strictly on JavaScript schemas is pretty cool. A little more complex than just defining your form in your single file component, but it gives you a lot of really neat functionality once you sort of grasp it and get your head around it. All right. So before we move on to picks, is there anything else you wanted to cover about VValidate that we haven't talked about yet?
I think just discussing uh, the current ecosystem of the Vue.js form libraries and how it's not like a comparison; it's mostly a summary of what the landscape looks like. So we have three, I think, main libraries right now. VValidate is one of them. We have FormKit and we have VueValidate. Yes.
Hmm.
So VueValidate, like I said, is imperative validation. It's mostly focused on validating values. It's up to you to hook it up to everything you need to. And then there is FormKit, which is providing you with components that you can style, extend, and they have a wide range of components that make you. It's really easy to build a form with FormKit. Like you drop a bunch of components and that's it. That's your form. But it's more of a component library than a form validation library, right? So that's it's because of how they think. I think in a recent talk in Vue.js Conf in US, they said their philosophy is deciding what about forms that can be abstracted, right? And they think forms should always live in the template, so they are declarative in the same way that VeeValidate likes declarative forms. And but they think that more like it's hard to abstract certain concepts uh, from forms without inputs or without components. Like you need to have your input. It has a lot of things, state related to it. So what's the point of abstracting just the minimal stuff about that without giving you the whole thing or a lot of the things that you might need, like minimum length, maximum length, and other stuff. But for VValidate, it's I think it's that's my like personal opinion is I think having a form component library is the same issue that faces us every time you build a huge app or an app that's meant to last a long time. It's how much can I extend it and how much can I override it, right? Overriding styles basically is age-old problem of uh, component libraries. Even with headless components or unstyled components, you have to adhere to the most of the HTML, right? And then you are forced to style that structure. It's you can customize some stuff, you can extend some stuff, but you can't really write something from scratch that that's like the freedom it takes away from you. Now, VValidate kinda offers you just state. It's up to you how you hook it up. So it kind of optimizes for people building their own components. So if you are someone who is looking to build a component library, then VValidate is going to be a better option than the others. However, if you wanted to have forms and get up quickly, ship something that's really high quality in really quick way, then FormKit or other libraries can do it for you.
All right. So with that, we will move to picks. Picks are the part of the show where we get to talk about anything we want to talk about within reason. That's not going to get us kicked off by the FCC or something like that. Not that they monitor podcasts. I will go first with the what I like to refer to as the dad jokes of the week, the high point of every episode. And still missing my sound effects. Got to get off my rear and get those figured out because without the rim shots, it's just not the same. But just do your best. Imagine the rim shot in your head when I say a great joke. So my son asked if I was named after my dad. And I said, well, of course I was. He was born many years before me, named after. So
Oh, okay.
thank you. Thank you. Um, And then I was making a cake the other day, and my wife asked me why I put it in the oven upside down. I said, "Well, I was just following the instructions. It said that it should go into the oven at 180 degrees." I suppose
That's a good one.
I could have turned it to the side instead of upside down, and it would have been the same. But that was how I was thinking. And then finally, people say they pick their nose, but I feel like I was born with mine. So anyway, that's it.
Okay.
David, do you have any picks for us today?
Oh, I do have a timely joke from like it's now it's the holidays here in the U.S. With Thanksgiving and Christmas coming up. So there's how does a gingerbread man make his bed?
I think I've heard this, but I do not recall.
With
Abdelrahman?
With a cookie
No, I
sheet.
got nothing.
With a cookie sheet. Very good, very good. I will tell my son that one. He will love that one. He will love that one. Thank you. It's always good to have people add to the joke repertoire on our show. All right, Abdelrahman, what do you have for us?
Well, I don't really have any dad jokes.
That's okay.
Kinda,
We all
yeah.
can't be perfect.
So I guess I recently went to Europe for the first time in my life. I went to give a talk in Berlin and then to Italy to give another talk there. So it's my first time outside Egypt, kind of like I went to other countries, but outside that part of the world,
Mhm.
Yeah.
So it was really an amazing experience because I think, like you said before the show, I didn't get to experience it as a tourist. I experienced it as someone who, I landed on a
Mhm.
plane, figured out how to move, how to go to the destination,
Mhm.
and without having luckily, I had some friends there who helped me figure things out, especially the public transportation system in Berlin, which it's weird, but I fell in love with it. It's amazing. Like it's really
Yeah.
amazing.
Is it mostly
Uh,
like trains, subways, or buses, or what
all
did you
of that,
use?
and almost everything. Like if I missed my bus, there is a train on the other side of the street. If I missed that train, then I go back to the bus, and it's all like 5 minutes away from each other in terms of timing, so I don't have to wait a lot. And the
Mhm.
Google Maps integration is just amazing. Like I'm not sure if you like it's for us or for my part of the world, it's non-existent. As public transportation is almost non-existent. You kind of
Mm,
have to know it to know how it works. But as someone who's a strange man in a strange land, you kind
right.
of just open Google Maps, and then I was like, I want to get there, and it's like, okay, just get on that bus that's gonna be in front of you in 2 minutes, and in 2 minutes it's in front of me, no delays. And if there was some delays sometimes, but the app said there is a delay because of a medical emergency, so it's 3 minutes late, and it's then on time. So it was
Wow.
amazing for me. For
Awesome.
Italy, it was just the food, which is amazing.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have that's one things I'd love to experience is the food, actually Italian food in Italy. I'm a Spanish speaker and grew up learning Spanish, and Mexican food is quite prevalent here in the US, to varying levels of quality and authenticity. And so I had always, I've always had Mexican food, tacos and burritos, and my famous favorite food had always been a chile relleno. And so I'd always liked that here. And then when I went to Mexico, I had a real chile relleno, and it wasn't some little flat thing. It was like a big, chili relleno. Was like, oh my gosh, that's what they're supposed to be like. So, and I lived down there for a few months, and lived in a house with the family and stuff. So got to experience quite a bit of non-touristy food. And ever since then, when I've come back, I've always differentiated between American Mexican food and real Mexican food. Um, and it's not too often that I see a lot of the authentic stuff up here like I do. It's funny. I found one place that made a chile relleno like the one I had in Mexico. And David, you'll um, understand this a little better than Abdelrahman, but it was in a small town in Tennessee.
Ah,
It wasn't anywhere down by the border. It was, I can't remember the name of the town. It was years ago, but I was struck. I was like, oh, this is a great place. And I just happened to be there on business. But yeah, I know, like here, and you can tell me if this is true out there. Um, Pizza, here we have pizza. We've got pizza joints and pizza restaurants, and you go anything from, your thin crust pizza, something like a Pizza Hut, to your custom places to Chicago, where you have quote unquote deep dish pizza, which is really thick. Um, Now, my understanding from what I've heard from people who've been to Italy and had real pizza is that it's very different. It's pretty thin crust. It's not this whole thick crust thing with injecting stuff into the crust, and stuff like
Yeah,
that. Is that
exactly.
correct?
Yeah, absolutely. It was thin, really thin.
Hmm.
Um, it was kind of like I expected more, like I had expected pizza in Italy.
Right.
I went to the birthplace of pizza. I'm gonna have the mother of all pizzas, like that kind of. But I just had really good pizzas. But yeah, I kind
Yeah,
of
I
expected
I
more.
would be considered a heretic because I my favorite pizza is what I call pine and swine, which is Canadian bacon and pineapple, and I'm gonna, people will call me heretics for liking that, but I'm gonna assume they didn't have those kinds of toppings in Italy,
No,
right?
never found them. Maybe you will get like I think people told me you will get kicked out for asking if like there is a pizza like that.
What?
Yeah.
You insult my food. Right. I
Yes.
could totally what kind of things did you have on your pizza when you were there?
It was mostly cheese and I think it's margarita cheese
Mhm.
or bunch of other types of cheese. And then I had there was this really weird small shop near my hotel, which I mean weird as in weird pizzas. They had this square pizzas, not circular, and you can
What?
ask for. Yes, and you ask for how much you can slice from that big square pizza. So you kind of have like a mix of multiple pizzas with
Huh.
multiple flavors, multiple toppings, multiple everything. So I had like a pizza with a cucumber on it. It was really weird. It was good. There was this potato pizza, and there was this, can't remember what it was, but they were all fantastic. But no fruits allowed on pizzas there apparently. So
Oh, boy, that sounds good. And here, me thinking, I thought pizzas always had to be round. I'm shocked that they would use another shape. For
yeah, I
sure.
was surprised as well.
Do they do like meats? You know, like we always have pepperoni or ham
Yes,
or
they
stuff like
have
that?
a lot of meats, but because I can't eat pork meat, so they kind of
Right.
have. I kind of had to avoid them. So
Sure.
chicken, beef, if they had it, but yeah, a lot
Right.
of pork meat.
Right. Interesting. Oh, I so want to try that sometime. All right. Well, enough talking about food. I'm really hungry. It's lunchtime and I'm past my lunch, so this has not helped. But anyway, thank you for coming on, Abdelrahman. It was good to finally be able to get you on. I know we were scheduled a while ago, but you got sick, if I remember correctly, as happens
Yeah,
quite a bit.
I'm sorry about that.
No, no, it's not your fault. It's good that we finally got you on to talk about VeeValidate for sure. I know it's something I've looked at and haven't actually used before, but definitely have to give it a try. Thank you, David, for joining us.
Been a pleasure.
Thank you for the addition of the jokes. It always makes the show better. And we'll say goodbye for now and talk at you next time on Views on View.